All right, thanks for coming out to our webinar presentation. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Zach of the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zach. I'm with the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council. This is Soapstone Creek of Trails, Weeds, and Waterways. And tonight I'm presenting with Brandon from Trail Keepers of Oregon and Josh, also Trail Keepers of Oregon. And just gonna go to the next slide here. Quickly give you a rundown of what we're going to be covering, just quick introductions to our organizations. We're going to talk about Soapstone Creek a little bit, the Adopt a Trail program, stream restoration, and then some visions for future collaborations. So let's go to the next slide. The Lower Nehalem Watershed Council's mission is to protect, preserve, and enhance the Nehalem watershed through leadership, cooperation, and education. Next slide. What that means we do is we collaborate with landowners, private companies, local, state, federal agencies, the community, and we do habitat restoration programming, and we also do a bunch of outreach and education. What is habitat restoration, you might ask? It involves everything from doing primary research. We just completed a bioassessment identifying where all the juvenile salmonids are spending their summers in the Nehalem watershed. It also involves fish passage projects, riparian plantings, in-stream enhancement like large wood placement and beaver dam analogs, which I'll touch on later, and wetland restoration. We do a variety of outreach events, including a biennial Nehalem estuary cleanup, which if you'd like to know more about, you can check in on our last slides. We also do a speaker series, which this is a part of, and we do some other events as well. Next slide, and over to y'all.
Thanks, Zach. I'm Josh. I'm a crew leader with Trail Keepers of Oregon. And for the folks tuning in who aren't aware of our organization, we're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to protect and enhance the Oregon hiking experience through advocacy, stewardship, outreach, and education. And what that sort of looks like, the stewardship part is pretty simple. We maintain trails, we restore trails, we build new trails, we engage with our land managers and help uplift the trail systems that everyone loves, and maybe some that aren't as well known. And the advocacy part comes in the form of representing hikers when we advocate to state and federal agencies in terms of their policies. We raise funds for the preservation and the expansion of Oregon's trail system. Our trails are only getting more and more loved, and it's our aim to add to Oregon's recreational trail capacity. We want to ensure that there's equitable access to trails for people, regardless of their abilities or backgrounds. And outreach we achieve in the form of conducting training of our volunteers in both leadership skills and trail repair and building skills. We encourage stewardship as a responsibility of every trail user. And we work towards building an infrastructure to connect volunteers with stewardship opportunities statewide. Here in the last year and a half or so, thanks to some generous funding from the Oregon Coast Visitors Association, we've really been focusing on outreach and uplift in the coast, and specifically on the Oregon Coast Trail. We've been doing a fair amount of work on the North Coast, including working on closing the gap in the Oregon Coast Trail on Neahkahnie Mountain, and working with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department to help them maintain and clear out some of the trails in those northern state parks. And as things continue, we're going to be reaching into central and south coast areas first with digital engagements, and then as things open up with some more in-person volunteer events. And we are actually getting ready to reopen volunteer events for folks on the coast who are local to our current volunteer opportunities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my cohort and the North Coast Stewardship Coordinator, Brandon Tigner. Good day, sir.
Hello there. Hopefully everyone can see me out there. Thank you for having us, and thank you for tuning in. To talk a little bit about how we're kind of partnering, Lower Nehalem Watershed Council, the North Coast Citizens for Watershed Protection, and Trailkeepers of Oregon. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing. And so Trailkeepers of Oregon was contacted by a volunteer for the North Coast Citizens named Victoria Stapiello. And we're going to have her on here very soon to talk about her role and how we met. But all of this surrounds this gem of a trail in this watershed, the Soapstone Lake Trail. And so what we want to do now, thank you, Josh, kind of give you an idea where this is located in relation to, the Oregon coast and then some of the Oregon coast trail activities that we have going on. This is kind of a map I threw together. The Soapstone Lake Trail is just about 12 miles northeast of Manzanita, out Highway 53. And so it's easily accessible from locals out here on the coast. And like I said, it's a gem to locals out here. So we want to talk about how we're going to partner to get this trail back up into tip-top shape. So now I think we should bring in Victoria to kind of talk about how we partner together and how we're going to move forward to complete this project and this idea that we have.
Well, I'm not on board yet, so.
Okay.
I see I have to start my video. Okay, there I am.
There you go. There you are. All right. So hello, Victoria. So
Yes,
could you introduce yourself and kind of
I'm
talk a little bit
Victoria
about yourself?
Stapiello. I live on the North Fork within Nehalem, 4 miles from Onion Peak, which is in the background. I've lived at the coast since '84. I've found out about Soapstone Lake probably in the late '80s and have been hiking up there, repeatedly. Mm-hmm. What has happened is, first of all, to tell people who haven't ever been there, it's a gem of a lake because it's a real natural lake in the Coast Range, and there are not very many of those. And so the first time I saw it, I went, wow, this is a real mountain lake. It is swimmable in the summertime, a little brisk, full of newts, but that's cool. Anyway, I'm going to start out just saying how I got connected eventually with Brandon. About a year, a little bit more than a year ago, my husband and I were going to do one of our periodic hikes up to the lake. We got to the turnoff from Highway 53. There was an ODF truck there. And we said, hey, you guys, what's up? And Matt, who is the recreation manager for that part of Clatsop State Forest, said, well, we can't go up there today. We're going to do a spray operation. And we said, what? And he said, yeah, we're going to do some vegetation management, hand spraying the trail. So you can imagine the discussion that ensued, because a lot of people on the coast are very concerned about herbicide applications, especially on large timberlands, but we certainly don't want to be walking through that stuff going up to our favorite lake. So long story short, Matt Grantham is the rec manager for Clatsop. And so he and I started communicating, and I said, well, what if volunteers were willing to come and help do vegetation management and keep the chemicals out? And he was up for that. And I'm been a member, so to speak, of North Coast Citizens for Watershed Protection. They started out dealing with herbicide spraying stuff that was happening in the watershed for Rockaway Beach. That's their municipal water supply. So that happened. And then I heard through the grapevine that Trailkeepers of Oregon was actually active and maybe looking for people at the coast to assist with some of their projects. So it took a bit of noodling around, and eventually Brandon and I connected, and we found out that we'd actually been in meetings together, but we just hadn't met each other before.
Right.
So that's how we got to where we are. The thing about the trail up to Soapstone Lake, almost anybody can do it. It's a relatively easy trail. It takes you through a historic Lindgren cabin location. The cabin's now up at Cullowhee Lake. It's been a beauty spot that has been kind of off the radar. And although we're now talking to more and more people about it, it's one of those double-edged swords. It's not Neocani Mountain with literally 60 people passing you on the trail on a summer afternoon. It's gonna like be 6 people passing you on the trail. And that's why it's been a real treasure for those of us who live here and endure sometimes onslaughts of tourists that are unbelievable. So that's my personal thing about it, is that, but the trail has gotten funky.
Yeah. So, Victoria, that was great. And I think that was a really good kind of primer for folks to kind of learn about the coast. But, you know, what made you get involved? And do you actually have any interest from the North Coast Citizens Group to do some of this trail work?
Yeah, well, at a meeting, after I'd talked to Matt a bit, there was a meeting of about 30 people. And at the end of the meeting, I said, hey guys, this trail needs help. And I didn't know about TKO at that point. I knew about them, but didn't have a contact. And like 26 people signed up. I said, yeah, I'm willing to help. And then I talked to Brandon, and he actually has the moxie to deal with that many people, train them, keep them safe. And I was like, good expertise. That's really what we need. And the other thing is, most of the people in North Coast communities for watershed protection are over 50 years old. And most of them are quite fit. But I said, you know, these are not your 25-year-old whippersnappers. And Brandon said, no problem. These people are great. They show up. And you said there were 3 things.
Yeah. Do you remember what they were?
Have fun. Take care of the trail. Let's see. I got my notes here.
Safety, fun, and then work.
Yeah. Safety, fun, and work. That sounds like the Oregon Country Fair. But anyway. So it just seemed like a natural relationship. And then this webinar thing came up, and I got sucked into talking to people about it. And I'm going to go on a side trip here. Drag me back, Brandon.
30 seconds. You got 30 seconds on this side trip.
Went out to Hell's Canyon a long time ago, and went into, I think, Joseph, went into a bookstore, talked to the bookstore owner, and we were saying, wow, this is really fabulous, and so on. And he said, yeah, the more people who come, the more likely it will get protected. But the downside of that is the more people who come, the more damaged it will be. So it's how do we find the balance between attracting people to a wonderful place and not damaging it in the process? So that's what we've got to try to pull off.
Absolutely. And, you know, I feel like that's a really good transition into our next part, training competent trail stewards. How do we train folks to come in to do this work with the least amount of impact that we can have?
Right.
And that's where we come in. I know that your group, North Coast Citizens for Watershed Protection, you guys have the gusto, you guys have, you know, the enthusiasm, the willing to learn, the bodies. And then what we're going to bring is the expertise to teach you how to be good stewards of the land. And so moving on to the next part, Victoria, before we let you go, I want to thank you, and then we're going to bring you back on for the Q&A at the end.
You bet.
But I just want to thank you for being a part of this. You know, this journey that we've been on, that we're still on to get this project done, has been quite nice. It's been very easy, and I enjoy working with you. So before we end, I just want you to know, thank you very much. And I look forward to continuing this journey.
We will.
Absolutely. All right, Josh. So moving on, getting back to the, training the competent volunteer stewards, one of the things that we can do at Trail Keepers of Oregon is that we have, the tools, we have the expertise and knowledge to come in to teach and train up these volunteer groups who may want to adopt a trail. So in this particular scenario, the Soapstone Lake Trail is what we're talking about. The North Coast Citizens for Watershed Protection, they've reached out to us with concern about that trail and how they can help out and get involved. And so what we're going to do as an organization, Trail Keepers of Oregon, is we're going to come in and we're going to basically lead some work parties for that organization to get them basically trained up to take on that stewardship role of that trail, moving on once we've trained them. So, what that will look like. Josh, if you can pull up a couple of the maintenance pictures that I have put together. Thank you. So this slide right here is just an overhead view of the Soapstone Lake Trail on Google Maps. This is my trail assessment overview. And each one of these pens is a maintenance issue that I have logged and that I've actually recommended to Clatsop County, Oregon Department of Forestry, some recommendations for maintenance on that. So that's what this is. And then moving on to the next slide, Josh, we want to talk about a couple of things that we're actually going to teach the North Coast Citizens for Watershed Protection when they are doing the maintenance on this trail. So a couple of things leading into this to get it back into tip-top shape. We need to work on some drainage issues. So that's the far left picture here. And I have more pictures than I actually have time to explain tonight that can fall in this category. But basically what this means is that water has found its way on the trail and it cannot find its way off. And so the trail either becomes very muddy, it becomes very wide. Thank you, Josh. You can kind of tell that if this were a rainy day, this would be a very pooled area. And Josh did a very good job at highlighting where that would be. And then, Josh, if you're listening, if you can, on the right side here, just kind of demonstrate maybe where we would put a drain in for this drainage picture. Basically, that's what we're talking about here. We need to go in, do very simple maintenance to allow this water to then run off the trail. Moving into this center picture here, this is more of a cupping picture here. So this is where the water is running down the trail. There's also a lot of hiking activity that's channeling this trail a bit. So what we would do is we would knock down this berm on the left. Josh, again, if you have, there it is. Nice. Very good. So we would knock that down, reestablish that tread, and then bada bing, bada boom. And then on the far right here, we have kind of an extreme example of tread creep, to where the tread surface itself has now started to kind of creep down the hillside and more or less disappear. So to kind of show you guys three basic examples of what we're going to be working with out there on the trail. These are it. It's all drainage. For the most part, the trail is fairly free of brush. There is a lot of invasive species, but for the most part, they're in the woods. So you'd have to go off trail to actually tackle that. And moving on from that, we haven't gotten word yet from ODF on when we can start these work parties. We're still kind of organizing the work parties themselves, what that's going to look like in terms of crew leaders and volunteers. And we are in talks right now with Victoria and the North Coast Citizens for Watershed Protection. But just so you know, look out for those opportunities. They're coming up quickly, and that should be coming online very soon. So thank you for your time, everybody. Moving on to Zach.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brandon. We're going to bring Zach up now. He's going to chat with us a little bit about what their folks are up to as soon as I get the screen share back up.
Well, that sounds great. Yeah, we have a slightly parallel, we have a quite parallel focus, in fact, because what we do mostly is that fish habitat work because we're a watershed council. I just want to throw this picture up here for you so you can kind of get an impression of the coverage area that the watershed council works in. We're very, very geographically defined, and the Nehalem watershed is sizable, and so we are actually split between an upper Nehalem watershed, which is on the north and east corner of this picture, and then the green, which is the lower Nehalem watershed. And if you want to move on to the next one. So a watershed is a series of tributaries that all flow into one major river that then goes out into, the ocean, or in the case, in the Midwest, it'd be the Great Lakes. And so we talk about creeks and streams in a watershed by what they're tributary to. And so Soapstone Creek watershed is a substantial watershed in the lower Nehalem, and it's tributary to Buchanan Creek, which is then tributary in turn to the North Fork Nehalem, which then runs down into the main stem Nehalem. And it's composed of Soapstone Creek, Jack Horner Creek, and 7 unnamed tributaries. And so of those tributaries to Soapstone Creek itself, on the Soapstone Creek Trail, you cross over one of the tributaries to Soapstone when you drive in. And then there's a nice bridge right after it, the historic meadow that used to have the homestead, where you cross over the main stem of Soapstone Creek and one of the other tributaries you can see actually coming in right there. And that's the tributary that eventually runs up to Soapstone Lake itself. It's pretty significant as far as fish production goes too, because for the North Fork Nehalem, the Soapstone Creek watershed produces 20% of the juvenile fish. And it's only 8% of the stream miles. And so it really popped out in our research as a major location to do habitat restoration. Also, it's mostly owned by the Department of Forestry, which means that we have a landowner who part of their mandate is also to do this kind of work with us, which is pretty excellent. And we really appreciate their help on these projects. The next slide is the results of some recent research we were doing. So I mentioned that we know that there's 20% of the juvenile coho in the North Fork are coming out of Soapstone. How do we know that? We actually hired a crew, Biosurveys LLC, to come out to the Nehalem, and they snorkeled every single anadromous or salmon available stream portion of the lower Nehalem and counted the juvenile fish they found, and then did some calculations. And so this graph here shows the density of coho in each of the surveyed pools in the main stem of Soapstone Creek. So on the left, you can see it says coho per meter squared. On the right, it says spawning gravel counts. Salmon require a certain size rock in the stream, a certain size gravel to spawn in. And that is about 1 inch to 2 inch size gravels. Much bigger than that, it's too challenging for them to dig out their redds or their nests. And much smaller than that, and the water doesn't percolate through and oxygenate the eggs properly. And so the last piece of this graph is that we have several anchor sites identified. And there's 3 concentrations of these blue lines. And those are areas that are prime opportunities for habitat restoration. They have wide floodplains. And if we got more habitat complexity in there and more large wood in there, we would activate those floodplains, get more water moving out into them, and really improve the nutrient cycle, slow down the flows, and create a lot of habitat diversity. And I think from there, we can move on to the next slide. So this is a picture of Soapstone Creek itself. And you can see that in this particular one, there's not really any large logs in the water. There's a couple little twigs here and there. And you have a lot of these stones in the creek bed that are very large. And so they're what we would refer to as boulder, which is about bowling ball size, to cobble, which is kind of that 3 to 6, 8-inch size stone. And that's too big for a salmon or a cutthroat trout or a sea run cutthroat or a steelhead to move around to spawn in. And so part of the problem is that there's that lack of large wood in here. The other piece to look at in this picture is that it's all kind of uniform in the distribution of the rocks, and the water depth throughout this entire portion is relatively uniform as well. So there's nowhere for the fish to hide. And they need to hide in the summers from the hot temperatures by going down to the bottoms of pools. So let's go on to the next picture. Here's another not great portion of Soapstone Creek. So you can see here that there's a big portion of bedrock exposed. And that's because, again, there's not much to slow the water down. There's not a lot of barriers or large woody debris, we call them, but logs in the stream to slow the water down as it comes through. And so it really tears around this corner and just pulls all of the material off of it. And so it's scoured down to bedrock there. And then on the right, you can see an assortment of, again, this is more the cobble size. So it's not trapping that good spawning gravel. And if we go to the next slide, you can see a good example of what a good spawning gravel bed looks like. And you can see that there's this nice pool kind of in the center of that image. And as you come to the foreground, there's all this nice gravel that, especially in the winter, is all inundated. It makes for great areas for the fish to spawn. And in the back of the picture, you can see that there's actually some logs there. And those logs are helping to create this complexity. They're influencing the flow to scour out that pool and then also deposit that gravel, because they're slowing the water enough that even though it's creating this pool, it's also letting the gravel then settle out and sort by size. So into the next slide. This is an example of some of the highlighting that we've done in Soapstone Creek based on this research of some of the priority areas to do restoration. And if you look at the concentration of blue dots on Soapstone Creek to the furthest right of this image, or the furthest east, that's right about where Soapstone Lake is, just south of that. And so all of that area is really important for restoration, and it's mostly in that condition I was showing you at the start of the pictures, where it's a lot of gravel and a lot of cobble-sized material, and not a lot of, a lot of boulder and cobble, and not a lot of the good gravels for spawning in, and not a lot of the good pools for the fish to hide in. If you go on to the next slide. This is a large wood project we did actually with Weyerhaeuser several years ago in 2017. And this is up on Little Grand Rapids Creek. And they were doing a timber harvest, which gave us the opportunity to get in there and do a large wood placement. So they had the machinery already positioned. They donated a bunch of logs to us, and we were able to create, again, this habitat complexity. And you can see there's this pool forming back behind the logs, and there's sediment building up there. And the water's going down over a short falls and scouring out a new pool. And it's protected from predators with all the logs laying over it, which also influence the flow in the winter. And then it's also beyond just downstream of here, sorting out those gravels for spawning. And if you want to pop into the next slide. Another great solution for this kind of a process is what we call beaver dam analogs. And to make a beaver dam analog, we take fir poles, generally Douglas fir poles, and we install them vertically in the stream bed. We embed them in the stream bed, and then we weave through branches. And it simulates the effect of a beaver dam, both giving beavers an opportunity to say, oh, wow, we could really easily improve this and establish here. but it also creates that broader floodplain that I was talking about and that pooling that I was talking about to improve the nutrient cycle and give the juvenile fish a place to hide. And then the last slide here is another example of a beaver dam analog, this time in the winter. And you can see really distinctly the lines of poles with all the weaving in between them. And so these are the types of projects that we're looking to do with the Department of Forestry up in Soapstone Creek and its tributaries. We think that if we can get in there with ODF and put in a whole bunch of these large wood projects and beaver dam analogs, we can really amplify its already productive waters to really improve the coho stocks coming out of the Nehalem. And so we can move into the next slide, which was kind of a collaborative slide because, you know, as we're thinking about what's going to be happening up at Soapstone Creek, it's really getting this concentrated attention right now from the North Coast Citizens for Watershed Protection and from TKO and from us with the Watershed Council and always from the Department of Forestry. And this is a really great opportunity for a lot of community supported recreation and opportunities, and also for the creation of some really good fish and wildlife habitat.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's going to be a great opportunity for our volunteers to get out there and to increase our volunteer stewardship opportunities out there on the coast and engage folks in a place that they know and love, which is what TKO is all about. We want to help communities uplift their trails that they love so much. So it's a really super exciting opportunity. Zach, I want to thank you. That was very fascinating. I learned a lot about salmon spawning that I just previously didn't know. So thank you very much.
Ask me about videos sometime. I have a couple.
Good. My YouTube playlist is getting kind of short these days.
Another thing I wanted to just mention is that these types of projects that the Watershed Council does is a really great vector to actually bring in a lot of employment to some of these rural communities that helps to create jobs restoring ecosystems in these communities where you know, there's not always a ton of employment available. So it's some pretty neat stuff to be involved in.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity all the way around.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much ends us what we had to present. I did want to give folks that are watching an opportunity to ask any questions. I am monitoring Facebook comments. And while we wait for the time lag to get that information to you, just a little bit of information. If you want to get involved with Trail Keepers of Oregon, check out our website. We are starting to very slowly roll out in-person volunteer events. We're also have adopted the Trail Ambassador program that was previously under the auspice of Friends of the Columbia River Gorge, and we're expanding that program and going to be including some trailheads there in the northern part of the Oregon coast. So we'll have volunteer opportunities as a trail ambassador. We have several webinars that are coming up talking about different projects that we're involved in here on the coast. We are working on a scouting series that we're calling Trail Eyes that give folks an opportunity to go out and log and track the issues on their trails and report them to us so that we know where we should start to try and concentrate our efforts and start to get with land managers. And, you know, we do Facebook Live events on a pretty well weekly basis. And I've got some email addresses up there on the screen. And Zach, if you do me the kind favor of letting folks know how they can get involved with the Watershed Council.
Yeah, so the Watershed Council, if you're in the Lower Nehalem area and watching this, and you have some river frontage, we are always looking to do more riparian plantings and get more shade over creeks to improve the nutrient cycle and help to cool the stream. We also are always looking for places to do more of these beaver dam analogs and wood placements, and everyone's welcome to keep tuned in for the Nehalem estuary cleanup in 2021. That will likely be at the beginning of March, before the there's some bird nesting seasons we have to avoid. But we'll be doing that in March, hopefully, and it's a pretty big event where we go around the entire bay, some on foot, some by boat, and we've filled up several dumpsters in the past. So it's a pretty exciting cleanup event.
That's awesome.
And also, feel free to email if you're in the area and have a culvert that needs replacing or something like that. We might be able to help out with that too. And we do educational events periodically. Our schedule will be picking back up again in October, when hopefully we'll be doing more in-person events again.
Excellent. Well, I am not seeing any questions percolate through in the comment sections. So I'll just take this opportunity to thank Brandon for his contributions, and Victoria for her contributions, and our ability to kind of get together, collaborate on this project. Thanks again, Zach, for hosting us. This is a speaker series that generally you guys do in a more physical space, but given what we're experiencing these days, I'm glad we were able to kind of pivot it and get some of this information out to folks. I think it's a really cool opportunity. I want to thank everybody out there in Facebook land for joining us this evening. And I think that at some point there will be a recorded version of this available. And thanks again to Akva for funding all the work that TKO is doing out there on the coast. And until we meet again in the digital space, I bid everyone to have a delightful evening.